right, so we're gonna start. So this is about CPQ deployments from zero to hero. So just a quick agenda. We're gonna talk about CPQ deployments at a high level. I'm gonna note here that I'm expecting everyone here to know CPQ. So this is not like a beginner CPQ webinar or anything like that. We're not gonna spend any time explaining what CPQ is and the different CPQ apps that Salesforce has. But I will note that this is about Salesforce CPQ, right? The original steel break package that became Salesforce CPQ. This is not about Conga CPQ or any other CPQ related product or industry CPQ. It's the original Salesforce CPQ. We're going to talk about what it looks like to plan a CPQ deployment. Then we're going to see how to deploy with the Salesforce Inspector. We're going to see how to deploy using the Salesforce CLI. And then we're going to see how to deploy with Salto. And then we're going to talk about some best practices for any CPQ project, regardless of how you choose to deploy. So a few intros. So myself, I'm Pablo Gonzalez. I'm a Salesforce architect at Salto. I've been here in the Salesforce ecosystem for about 12 years. My internet is bad. Just got a warning here that my internet's unstable, but okay. Been here for like about 12 years, doing a bit of everything, development, admin, architecture, and I've been in Salto for 2 years. And my role here is to oversee everything that has to do with Salesforce, whether it's product, engineering, marketing, and all that. Dennis.
I'm Dennis Palmer. I'm author of morecpq.com. I've been doing CPQ for about 10 years now. I just started a new business, More CRM, and do some staff log and CPQ implementations. Good to be here.
Thank you. Sham?
Yes, thank you. So similar background, Dennis. Hi guys, my name's Sham. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for a number of years now, predominantly within that CPQ space. And I help companies to implement CPQ, whether that be end user or for my company Buddle to help companies implement that billing lifecycle management process.
Nice. Thank you, Sham. Matt?
You're on mute.
Good start. Thanks, Pablo. Hey, everyone. So I'm Matt Grimway, co-founder and CTO of Zipline, based over here in the UK, just outside of London. So we're one of the new kids on the block, really. So we're a Salesforce consulting partner that I started up this year with my co-founder, Jake Stevens. We've both got over 10 years experience in the industry, delivering Salesforce solutions of all sizes, not just CPQ, but across a variety of different clouds and industries. For me personally, I come from a developer and architect background, and I've been lucky enough to be involved in several large CPQ implementations. So I know the pain and I know the value of topics like this. So yeah, Pablo, thanks for having me on.
No worries. Okay, so I want to highlight quickly, this is not a webinar about Salto, but I realize that a lot of people here may not know what Salto is. So I'm going to take less than a minute to just tell you about what Salto is, and then we'll move on to the actual webinar. So Salto is a application for, we do DevOps for business applications. So we're not really a Salesforce specific product. We do DevOps for Salesforce, Jira, Zendesk, Workato, NetSuite, Okta, and a few others. So everything that I'll show you today is also available for other apps that your teams may use. And kind of what our use cases are is we're really good at, helping you understand the different relationships of your metadata and your configuration, being able to find hard-coded values as well. We're really good at deploying as well, both metadata and CPQ data. We also have CI/CD if you want to automate actions, which we'll see as well later. And of course, we do version control. And again, that is available for Salesforce CPQ, as well as other enterprise apps like Jira, Workato, Zendesk, etc. So that is the advertisement for the day. So let's talk about CPQ deployments. So in general, we define a CPQ deployment as the act of deploying, migrating, or moving, whichever verb makes sense, CPQ data across different Salesforce orgs. So there are different use cases for this. One could be data seeding, right? So if you have a developer sandbox that doesn't have any CPQ data, it's impossible to do anything CPQ related. So you may want to do a deployment from production or UAT into that dev sandbox to seed it with realistic CPQ data. It could also be the other way around, right? You may have that data in a UAT sandbox where you're preparing for a CPQ go live, and eventually you need to figure out a way of moving that data from UAT to production, right? So how do you do that? It's the answer that we're looking for. It could also be about keeping the orgs in sync. So again, you may have UAT production or other full sandboxes, and you can do deployments across these different orgs to make sure that CPQ behaves the same across all sandboxes. Now, we're going to talk about some challenges first, just to understand why CPQ deployments are so hard. So I stole this screenshot from a blog that I need to link to it later, but I take no credit. One of the problems with CPQ is that the data model is very complex, and this screenshot I think is probably not even like half of the real CPQ data model. So it all starts with the product, but then there are so many related objects, and the way they interact together as well can be very overwhelming if you're new to CPQ. And obviously it means that you need to deploy all of them together. You can't deploy your products without the product features or without the product rules, because then you have an incomplete CPQ configuration. So all of this needs to be deployed together as a coherent whole for your CPQ, I guess, application to make sense. And that's just really hard, because it's a lot of dependencies. You need to find out all the fields, all the different IDs. You may need to do external ID mapping or use, very complicated scripts. So that's one of the pain points. Another thing is that CPQ has very strange configuration where the actual records of CPQ can point to API names of fields or objects that are part of the package, or maybe that you created yourself. So here I'm showing you a screenshot of a CPQ data record where you actually configure some fields, and the values on those fields are the API names of some other objects completely somewhere else in the package. And so this creates a very strange dependency where if those fields don't exist in your target org where you want to deploy, then this configuration doesn't make sense. And of course, Salesforce doesn't provide any validation to check if those names are actual fields that exist in those objects. So it's really hard to reason about when you have this data and metadata kind of dependency. Finally, I always like to say that CPQ data is data that wants to be metadata, right? If you think about the way CPQ works, you have all these rules, all these attributes, automatic discounts. If this had been a standard Salesforce functionality, we would have configured all that on the setup menu. But because it's a managed package, it's all via custom objects. But really, this is metadata. It is configuration data, and it almost wishes it was, but it's not. So it doesn't benefit from all the benefits of Salesforce metadata, such as, there's really no easy way to do version control on that, to understand what has changed by whom. Very hard to do Git-based deployments this way, very hard to do rollbacks. Also very hard to have some sort of approval process to decide who can change this data or what type of changes can be made. And as I explained earlier, there are so many relationships that it's very hard to kind of do the impact analysis or dependency analysis to understand where things are being used. So these are kind of, some of the pains of deploying CPQ, and hopefully in this webinar, we can show you 3 different ways of deploying CPQ data and how we can overcome some of these challenges. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand it over to Dennis, who's going to talk a little bit about CPQ deployment planning.
All right. So when we are doing a deployment, whether it's a big one or a small one, you always want to have a few things in mind, or actually physically plan it out like this. So first you want to understand what data you're moving. Is it legacy data? Is it CPQ config data? Deployment planning and data migration is not just a CPQ thing. So, but here, products, features, options, which things are you going to be moving? Once you decide on things you're going to move, you want to export your data and analyze it. What kind of redundancies are there? Are there any duplicates? Is there things missing? And do you have some dependencies that maybe need to be revised? Or, sometimes maybe you find a price rule that, hey, we had that duplicated and we don't want it duplicated. And then there's resources and schedule. So based on how big your deployment is, you'll either just need yourself and a couple hours, or you'll need a team and a whole weekend. So it really matters planning this kind of thing, especially when you're, if you're doing a bigger deployment. It really matters how your time and the people involved. So there's 3 ways to deploy your data, or we're going to go over 3 ways to deploy your data. The first way is with Salesforce Inspector. So let's do a simple deployment. So first, it's a powerful tool, the Inspector. I don't know if anybody, if you don't know what it is, it's a Chrome plugin. You essentially go on the Chrome plugin store and you add it to your browser, and it just it becomes this little tab that sits on the side of your Salesforce instance. We can see in the export, this tab appears in every screen of your instance. So whatever screen you're on, you can analyze your instance in many different ways. So we're going to be using the data export and data import screens. So this lets you really do a lot of things with your org. So when do we use this? We use this for one-off deployment things. So if you need a price rule, or you need, hey, we added a product, not super recommended for your giant deployments that might take a whole weekend. This would be very time consuming and prone to human error for large deployments. And then who is this for? So this is for if you're comfortable with data loader, spreadsheets, manipulating data, then this is a good tool for you. So we can jump right into what this looks like. So what do we do first? So we've decided that we're going to move products and features. And so the first screen is we're going to export our products. So we put in our query. This can be any query. You can, we're just selecting all fields from product. You have to have this limit if you're using the all fields. We don't have that many products. But again, this could be any query, and we'll see another query in our next export. So I click the run.
Dennis, do you recommend exporting all fields, or should we be more selective about what we want to migrate?
Yeah, so it really depends on what you're migrating. In, if really you're just going in and editing product codes for your products, then yeah, you can change this to give me the ID and the product code, and then you update your product codes and export them and import them. That's a good question.
Nice. All right, go ahead.
So here's my export. I can run it as many times as you want to. So there's some buttons here. You can copy Excel, CSV, or JSON, depending on what your destination is going to be. We are using a spreadsheet, so we're going to copy in Excel format. I have a pre-configured spreadsheet here, and really you just paste it in. So right off the bat, we can see a row that we don't need. It's the header, so we can delete that row. The first column in every single query that you do in this tool has the name of the object that it is referencing. And so you can either keep this here or not. It doesn't really matter, but this is all of our data. Generally, when we do an import, we might get rid of this column here so that it is a update or an insert, I mean. So once you have your data here, you can remove rows, maybe notice any things that you need to go and change. But once we're ready, say this data is perfect, we come to the import screen. So this import screen has a few configurations here. The meat of this is this data box where you just paste your Excel data here. And so that's what I did here is I selected the header and all the rows and we copy, and then we can paste it here. So what this did is it thought that I'm doing an update because I included the ID field. So we can switch this back to insert because we're not going to use the ID field. We also noticed it automatically picked product 2, which is great. And in the field mapping here, you can map all of your fields. This is where you choose which fields you want to keep. So for the things that were not readable, we want to exclude. Also in this list at the very bottom, you can see which fields are not in this org. So these fields aren't in this org. This is a good way to second check yourself to say, hey, I forgot to move these fields to the org. So once you have your field mapping done, you run the insert. Once you click the insert, you'll get IDs. It does the insert and then puts the IDs in this output here. And once you do that, you can go back here and paste back in your IDs. So now we have the destination org IDs in our spreadsheet. The reason we need these is because we're importing product features next. And you'll see where we're going to use this ID column. This is where I would normally say any questions.
I've got a question, Dennis.
Yeah.
Is there a limit on kind of the amount of records you can use to upload through this tool? I'm just thinking if you had thousands of price book entries you wanted to upload, are you going to have to break that up into batches, or is that something that is supported?
So this will break it up into batches for you. You can set the batch size. This is very similar to a data loader situation where you get to set how big your batch is. I believe the maximum is 200 for one batch, but you can set it smaller and it will break up this batch for you. It also gives you threads, so it will multitask, and so that your task is done sooner. So it will, in cases where you have records that depend on each other, you want to set this to 1. So if you're importing products and that product references other products, I always set the threads to 1 because we just want to do them sequentially in order. And you can even, order by here so that it does them in the proper order. But yeah, you would definitely want to set your batch size and set your threads.
Nice.
That's a good question. So the next thing we want to do is our product features. Same thing, we're going to use a query. I'm going to get all fields, or you could get the fields that you want to import based on what you're changing. I'm using an external ID here. So for my products, so this external ID is going to show up in our query, and you can see here's our external IDs. So same thing, we copy Excel format and we come over to our spreadsheet and we paste them in. Same thing here too, we don't need this header column. Now we can remove these IDs because we're just going to do an import. So if we scroll over, we can see I've made a column for configured SKU. So in our features are related to products. So each feature is associated to a specific product, saying here's a feature for this product. And in this field is an ID. This column is a lookup into our product 2 tab, passing in what we're using as our lookup, which is the external ID, and then saying a range and which field to pick in the product 2 field to put here. It's saying it's a bad thing because this is a column formula and we pasted data here. We don't want that data. So then, and so this is typical data stuff that you have to do manually when you're using spreadsheets like this. This is like the caveat to using a spreadsheet like this, and you know, a data importer tool. So the next thing is it can't find these values, and the reason is because this external ID needs to be the first field in our products, but it's not the first field. So let's go find it. Here's our external ID. I'm going to just drag it over to be the first column. And then we, let's see here. You can see now it's not, it's the first column. It's finding the values, but it's not the right values because we're looking for the second column to be the ID. So we move that over. And now we have our IDs. Yay!
That's some Excel witchcraft.
It is. And when I found this way of doing formulas instead of pasting a formula into every single cell, it was a glorious day. So now that we have these are our features fully fleshed out, we do the same thing. We copy the data, we come over to our import, and we paste it in. It did the same thing. It picked up our object that we're using, but we're also skipping a bunch of fields here too, because we're doing an insert. We have a bunch of fields that are read only. You can tailor this in your query to not even query those fields. So once we have our mapping down correctly, we run the insert and it will insert our IDs once that happens. And then we come back here and then insert our IDs into our IDs into this column here. And then after we do features, we're going to do options, and we're going to do configuration rules, product rules, price rules. We're going to do the things that we need to move in the same fashion. So options would have 2 ID fields that you would do in the same way. But that's it in a nutshell.
And then Dennis, Chris has asked a really good question around using VBA macros in Excel to automate this work. And with CPQ, because the number of fields changes, your update and inserts changes, you can create macros, but by the time you've created it, it's redundant on your next upload. So you need to be as much of an Excel wizard as a CPQ wizard sometimes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I've written macros before to do similar things like data manipulation more than this kind of you would need to have your imports be the same every single time. To Sham's point is every import can be different. So you're changing the query that you're doing, the fields that you're pulling. If you define a standard way that you always do deployments, then yeah, sure, you can create a macro and use it every time. But you're going to notice that your deployments are different, and then your macro needs to be adjusted, and then you have a bank of macros. So yeah, you can. So if you're good at it, then yeah, go ahead, Pablo.
No, I was saying thanks for that. So if we want to, because this was a pretty quick overview, right? So where can we learn more about this process?
Yeah, so I wrote an article as a guest star on the Salto blog, and it's all about this. So there's more detail, more screenshots, a further example to go into and look at this migration with Inspector. I will also notice I am using Inspector Plus. So there are two Inspector extensions, Inspector and Inspector Plus. So here you see kind of the logo and even this screen here is the regular Inspector. I switched out to Inspector Plus. It's the same tool, but with a much nicer interface and kind of updated screens and updated functionality.
Nice. That's great. Thanks a lot for that demo, Dennis. That was great. Matt, what's the second best way to deploy CPQ data?
Yeah, let's do it. I'll share my screen and we'll crack on. Cool. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see it.
Cool. Okay. Cheers for that, Dennis. So kind of moving on to the next way that we can deploy CPQ data. So I'm going to talk through and give you a quick demo of the SFDX data move utility. So what is that? What am I talking about? So the SFDX data move utility, I'm going to refer to it as SFDMU from here on out. It's an open source plugin for the SF CLI. It's a general data migration plugin. It's not specific to CPQ, but CPQ is a great use case for it. I kind of refer to it as the data loader on steroids for those that have used the data loader tools. So when would you use it? For those kind of larger, more complex data migrations, CPQ deployments, and I would say especially when you want a repeatable deployment as well, maybe something you might look to incorporate into your release process and your CI/CD process. Who's it for? So this is a CLI tool, and it requires some hands-on configuration. There is a GUI version of it, but I haven't used that side of it. But to come back to the question that was just asked around Excel and macros, I would say if you're comfortable creating an Excel macro, it might be worth looking into something like this tool. So I'll jump into a demo and I'll show you how it works and how we configure that, and I'll talk you through the scenario that we've got set up here. So I've got two orgs open up here. So in blue at the top, hopefully you can see that I've got my source org. So this source org has some of my CPQ data in it, right? So we can see we've got a list of products. If I click into one of my products, like the 13-inch laptop, we can see we've got all of our CPQ fields that I'm sure everyone on this call knows and loves. And if I click on related, we can see we've got some related product features and some related product options. So this is a bundle, essentially. So not only have I got some products, I've also got some options and some features and all of the relationships between those. If I come into my purple org at the top here, my target org, so I'm in a separate environment now, we can see this environment doesn't have anything in it, right? It's an empty org. Maybe I've just created it. It's going to be our new test sandbox, something like that. And similar to Dennis's scenario, I want to migrate my CPQ data from my blue source org at the top of all of those products into my target org. And the way I'm going to do that, we're going to do a really quick demo, is using this SF CLI plugin, SFDMU. So I'm going to jump into VS Code now and just show you how that's configured. So got a really simple like VS Code project set up here. There's no Salesforce metadata in here for those that are familiar with that. It really is the minimum we need to get this plugin working, right? So as I said, this plugin is a general data migration plugin, right? So we need to give it some instruction. We need to tell it what data to migrate from which organ and to where. And in my example here, I've set up some really simple configuration. And as we know, we want to use the plugin to migrate some of our CPQ data. So how does it work? Well, kind of leading on from some of the queries Dennis was defining when he was using the Salesforce Inspector, we need to tell the tool via a query what data to retrieve for our migration. So we can see here we've got 3 queries, one for product, one for product feature, and one for product option as well. It also, like Dennis's example, supports multi-select on the fields. So I'm selecting the name field and all of the custom fields, but we could select all fields or the creatable fields or the updatable fields. There's loads more that this tool supports other than what I'm showing. This really is like the simplest example we can do. So I definitely recommend going and having a deep dive on their website and having a look at all the different features that it supports. But what we've got here is basically a really simple configuration in JSON. So I've had to roll my sleeves up a little bit to build this. And I'm telling the tool I want to migrate products, product features, and product options. And crucially, what I'm looking for through this tool is the relationships between those objects to be maintained. So I don't want to mess around with external IDs or VLOOKUPs or mapping the IDs from one record to another. I want the tool to, when it puts the products in and the product features and the product options, I want it to maintain those relationships. I want my 13-inch laptop automatically to have the right product features and product options linked to it. So how do we actually run the tool? We've just defined some configuration. Well, this is where coming to the command line. I've got my command set up ready. So just to walk you through this really quickly, it's using the SF CLI, which is a Salesforce developer tooling. And I've already installed the SFDMU plugin. And there's one command that plugin supports, run. I want the SFDMU tool to run a data migration. We need to tell it a couple of things though. So what's our source org? Where are we trying to run that migration from? And that doesn't have to be an org. It could be CSV files as well. And we have to tell it where we want it to run to. So my source username is this is my alias for my blue source org I showed you. And for my target username, this is my alias for my purple org that we showed you, right? So here I'm saying pick up the data using this export.json configuration file, which the plugin knows to automatically look for. Pick it up from this org and drop it into this org. The other thing I'm looking for from this tool, so I'm going to hit enter and let it run. I'm conscious of time, so I'm kind of speeding over some of this. The other thing that I'm looking for this tool is in one command, I want this tool to upload all 3 objects, right? I don't want to have to upload products and then upload product features and then upload product options. I want the tool to run, upload all 3 in a single process and maintain those relationships between them as well. So that's run. That took 18 seconds, which is obviously quite good. And if you scale this up to 30 objects across the whole CPQ configuration data set, once you've got it configured, it can really be quite a powerful way of migrating and running those deployments. So to finish off, if we jump back to our
hey Matt,
environment?
This did my whole demo in 18 seconds.
Yeah, I think that probably undersells it, because ultimately the hard part is building this file, right? So yeah, get myself back and start, Dennis. But the performance of the tool itself, you're right, is quite quick. Coming back to finish off then, looking at my target org, if I hit refresh here, I'm now going to expect to see my products that have been taken from my source org, dropped into my target org. And if I click into my 13-inch laptop, we can see here we've got all of the fields have come across. And if I hit related, we can also see the relationships have been maintained. The external IDs have been mapped automatically without having to do any mapping, so that we've got our bundle, we've got our product features, and we've got our product options. I saw a question in there that I can't resist answering, in that, does SFDMU have a way to disable the triggers? No, as Pablo said, it's not a CPQ specific tool, it's a data migration tool. But one of the first things I like to do for a CPQ implementation is put the right frameworks in place that do allow us to easily turn off those triggers and set those values, which then can be incorporated into kind of a tool like this as well.
And Matt, just to add to that, in the CPQ package, there's a checkbox to disable triggers as well. That's really easy to go in and do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've always wondered what those triggers do, because in Salto, we also recommend people to disable that, but those are managed package triggers, so I don't know what they do, so I'm not sure. How do you know that it's safe to disable them? Like, what if there's some critical stuff that they do that you want it to happen? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if you were gonna, I'm sure everyone's got a view on this, but my view on that is, if you're gonna check that disable triggers box on the CPQ package level, that's a good example of where you need downtime within the org, right? Your users can't be using it because the pricing calculations aren't going to run. You've told them not to run. But what there also is, Pablo, is you can do it at a transactional level. So there's some static Apex methods that the package exposes, that for a specific Apex transaction, you can disable the triggers, which is obviously only going to impact your transaction that you're running in. So there are alternatives, but sometimes we have to turn them off and enforce kind of an out of hours deployment.
Nice. All right.
Cool. Yeah, and more than Pablo will be the first to tell you, I'm always happy to talk about this tool. I'm a big fan of it. So if there's any questions, or if anyone wants to chat about this or CPQ or Salesforce in general, definitely reach out on LinkedIn, and I'm always open to that. Yeah.
It's a question there, if there's a full JSON for CPQ available, that'd be nice, because there are dozens of objects. So it'd be nice to have like if I just want to populate a sandbox with CPQ data in 5 minutes, what does that file, that JSON file, look like? That's an interesting exercise.
That's something I could work on for more CPQ.
Yeah.
Good idea. Good idea.
All right. So my turn. So Matt, if you stop sharing, thank you. Okay, can you see my screen? Yep. All right, cool. So this is the last way of deploying CPQ data, and this is with Salto. So what this is a way of deploying CPQ data as metadata, benefiting from those kind of metadata benefits that I spoke earlier, dependencies, version control, rollbacks. And we can also deploy this alongside metadata. So Salto is not a data migration tool. I want to be very clear on that. We have a very specific approach for allowing you to deploy CPQ data as if it was metadata, right? You treat it the way that it deserves to be treated. And you can deploy it, again, alongside normal metadata like fields, flows, page layouts, etc. Obviously, conceptually, you're migrating data, but we don't want people to think of it as a data migration tool, because it's really about just, is a normal DevOps CI/CD tooling that includes CPQ as a normal metadata that can be deployed. It also includes, as I said, the where is used functionality to be able to see where your CPQ configuration is used, any hard-coded values as well. And it includes, like I said, deployment, rollback, and git. So who is this for? This is for teams that are, serious about managing their CPQ implementation at scale. So teams that are constantly changing their pricing, that have big CPQ projects going on, this is a good fit for that. So against my better judgment, I'm going to do a live demo. And the reason I say that is I just really don't like doing live demos. We use a tool in Salto called Walnut that allows us to do demos by kind of screen captures. And they're great for Dreamforce and stuff like that because you can just show the same thing over and over again. But there are so many things happening in the background. You have Git, you have Salto, you have the Salesforce API. And if any of those go wrong, then, then the demo is horrible. But I'll give it a try. We'll see what happens. So this is Salto. So I have my two environments here. Each Salto environment corresponds to a Salesforce org. And I have a similar use case, to Matt's. So I have this laptop 15 product, which is a bundle. So it also has some features. And it also has some options. Remember that the option is a junction object that looks up to another optional product, right? So the options by themselves don't really represent anything, but it's the relationship that they create with another product that is kind of the optional. The scenario is a little different because I do have this product in my target org, which is this one here, CPQ Webinar 2 in red. This is going to be my target. So I do have the product. It's not brand new. But there are some values that are different. You see that, for example, the configuration type in the target is allowed, and here it's required. So a few things are different. And as I said, in the source, I have the whole bundle with the features and the options. But in the target, that bundle doesn't exist. So I only have the top level product. I don't have any of the related records. So the question is, can I use Salto to deploy that bundle? So in Salto here, I'm going to create a deployment where I'm going to say the source of my deployment is going to be CPQ Webinar 1. The target is Webinar 2. We're going to call this laptop bundle. And so Salto's deployments are based on comparing the two orgs. So again, this is not really a CPQ deployment. This is an org comparison that is happening across all metadata in these two orgs, including CPQ data. So if I wanted here to deploy something like an assignment rule, or maybe I have some list views, etc., I can do that alongside CPQ data. I can also filter here. Let's say I just want to see products. I don't want to see Apex classes and all that. So I can also use these filters here. I can also filter by who last made a change and maybe a range date. Maybe I changed this 2 weeks ago, but I don't remember what I changed. So I can go ahead and filter by that. We also make it very easy for you to understand, if things are new, meaning what doesn't exist in Webinar 2 versus what does exist, but is different in the two orgs. So in this case, because I know what I want, I'm going to search for it. So I'm going to search here for laptop. That's another nice feature. You can search across the entire org diff. So here I have the laptop 15, which is the product. So the first thing I want to show is that in Salto, we allow for very granular deployments. So rather than just overriding the product in the target with everything that is different, I can choose to deploy only individual values, right? So let's say if for some reason this option layout makes sense in my sandbox because I'm doing some testing, but it doesn't make sense in production, I can just skip it. I don't need to override the entire record. So that's kind of the first nice thing. Then, so let's say I just want to select these two fields, right? I don't want to deploy any more changes from this product. Now, the moment I highlight or the moment I select that product, Salto very quickly highlights that there are additional dependencies to this product. And if I open that up, that is the entire bundle. So it's telling me that the product has a relationship to a cost, 3 product features, and 3 product options. So you see, this is pretty real time. It's not like I created the deployment and then later it told me, oh, you're missing all this stuff. As you add your records to the deployment, Salto starts letting you know, hey, you're missing these dependencies. So in this case, I'm going to select all of them, but a reminder that the product options are just junction objects. They're not really the other product. So once I selected this, if I close this, you'll see that Salto is now highlighting that there are 7 additional dependencies that are missing. If I click here, if I close this filter and click here, those are those products that are related to the product options. So again, very easy to understand the entire bundle, all the relationships, whether it's junction objects or just child objects, is very easy for you to start adding this data. So I'm going to add all those products, and then I can review my selection here. This is basically everything I have. And if I'm happy with that, then I can I can create a deployment preview. The deployment preview is Salto doing an internal validation of the data and metadata that you're going to deploy, just to make sure that there are no missing dependencies. I'm going to answer a question while we wait. Does this work to compare non-CPQ objects data too? Anna, yes. So here I'm showing CPQ because that's the purpose of the webinar, and we know that's kind of the more interesting use case. But actually, our implementation is completely agnostic. It's not like we have a CPQ connector or adapter. I configured the Salto environment here to fetch those objects, but you could also do it with field service data. It could be Conga Composer. It could be Health Cloud. Any data that represents configuration data, you can use Salto to deploy it alongside your metadata. We offer the exact same experience that you're seeing right now. Okay, so now that I have the deployment preview, another thing that's really interesting is Salto automatically created a pull request for me, right? So I can do version control, I can do reviews. So again, this goes back to that concept that this is not a data migration that I'm doing. This is a real metadata deployment that includes CPQ data as metadata. So in the pull request, I can see all the files that have changed. So what you're seeing here is the text representation that we use to represent those product features and options. And then, of course, you can also see the product and the specific changes that I selected. You could use the PR in any way you want, right? So you could have branch protection rules, or you can have some automation. You could have a rule that says that you require approvers before you can deploy. You can do really whatever you want. And Salto is going to honor that. So if you create a branch protection rule or something that blocks that PR from being deployed or from being merged, then Salto will kind of block the deployment. I'm not showing that here because it'll make a much more complicated demo, but this is not just a PR that, just for the sake of it. You can tie or attach automation and validation to that, and Salto is going to honor that. So in this case, I'm not going to do any of that. So I'm just going to use the PR as a review mechanism. Maybe a dev lead or a product manager can look at this and make sure that, yeah, these are the products that we want. Or maybe they can ask a question and say, are we sure that this is what we want? So again, very, kind of high level process, not a data migration, more of a proper release management process. So once that's done, I can just deploy. Somebody asked a question earlier about this. So Salto also doesn't disable the triggers, but it will remind you that, hey, you may want to disable your CPQ triggers. This is just a kind of a warning. And once you've done that, then you just hit deploy, and that's it. We start using the Salesforce bulk API or SOAP API, whichever is needed to do the actual deployment. I didn't show it here, but this also could have included, as I said, metadata. So I could have included profiles and Apex classes and fields and everything in the exact same deployment. So there's nothing interesting here. This will just finish, and you'll see that it's a successful deployment.
Hey, Pablo.
Yeah.
Will this do data that isn't configuration data, opportunities, accounts?
If you want to, but we don't want you to do that, because it starts, we start getting into PII territory. You start getting a lot of customer data that is not necessarily what we want to have in Salto. So of course, Salto doesn't know if it's an opportunity, a case, or an opportunity, or a product. But but we really want you to do this for configuration data. So any data that affects the runtime behavior of your org, we recommend to use Salto for that. But again, if you really want to, yes, you could use it for seeding opportunities and other stuff, but it's not something that we really want to do. And look at that. That is my first ever live demo, and it actually worked. So nice. So as you can see, you have a successful deployment. The PR is closed. I don't have an example here because I only have 2 environments, but I'm going to show you if I have other environments. Let's say I have a UAT environment or an integration environment, and multiple deployments have been made to that environment that are CPQ as well. I can then kind of cherry pick those deployments and promote them to another environment. So again, it's the full metadata, style deployment. So if I have 3 deployments that happen over the course of 2 weeks to integration, then on week 3, I can just cherry pick the ones I want and promote them to the next environment. There are a few questions there about how does Salto compare against Copado and Gearset. Can't really answer that right now. What I'll tell you is, as I said, this is not it's not a plugin, right? It's not something, it's not an external thing. It's not another functionality that Salto does. This is part of our experience, right? Whether you're deploying data or metadata, CPQ data, field service data, whatever, we offer the same consistent experience of deploying it as metadata. If you have more questions, yeah.
I think I can also just add to that and field that question, because I'm a Gearset user. One of the things that Gearset doesn't do as well, and Pablo got me excited about this bit, is Salto allows you to deploy on a field-by-field basis, whereas Gearset does it on a record basis as well. And there's also an aspect of monitoring your changes that you must purchase Gearset CPQ to be able to do as well.
Yeah.
From my perspective.
Yeah, and that's true. And again, it's just fishy territory on a webinar, because it's also very customer specific, right? What you value. I'd say again, Gears is a good product. Copado is a good product. Our approach is more about, this is not a migration. This is not an afterthought product. This is baked into the Salto experience, right? So if you are an org that are doing consistent changes to your CPQ data, we want to give you the best way possible to manage that as metadata, including version control, automation, pull requests, the whole thing. I insist that it's not a data migration tool. Not that there's anything wrong with data migrations, that there are tools like the ones that Matt showed and the approach that Dennis showed for migrating data, which are 100% valid. I'm going to stop now and just, Sham, if you can just walk us through a few best practices, right? So once we have kind of decided what to do, what tool to use, what are some things that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, so this is, I must say, this is tool agnostic, and this is around your own processes that you should implement. So I've listed some good practices to implement, and these are things that you can take home and do today in your own CPQ deployment. So one of the things that you want to make sure you do is track your changes, whether that be your own deployment log or you've got a formal process. Know what you're updating, deleting, and inserting. And the reason for that is because CPQ is so heavily data specific. If you're deactivating a price rule and you forget to migrate that along, that's pricing that your sales reps and your customers are going to see. So it's important to track those changes so you have visibility. And that sort of goes hand in hand with planning, knowing which records you're actually updating. So for example, if you've got CPQ in production already and one of your product now requires a discount schedule, you're creating that discount schedule in your dev org and linking it to the product. When you migrate it to production, you want to make sure you link it back to the product. So you'll migrate your discount schedule and your product. So that goes back to something Dennis was touching on earlier as well, is making sure that you understand that relationship. So tracking and planning go hand in hand here. This is a really good simple hack, and it's counting the number of records that you have. When you're in your developer org and you've got 30 price rules and you've got 30 price rules in production and you're only creating 10, but you only see 38 once you've migrated, you know something's gone wrong. So count the number of records is probably the best tip anybody can give you, because it's really simple, but it gets you thinking about your entire deployment lifecycle. And probably one of the most underestimated parts about not just CPQ, but about Salesforce in general is testing. Once you've deployed into production, because it's data, people tend to go, oh, I don't need to test in production. But like Pablo said, treat your data like metadata. So you want to do some regression testing once you're in production as well. So those are things that you can take away home and related to your data and metadata deployments. From a wider CPQ project perspective, it's important not to lose sight of what you're doing. So from a CPQ process management perspective, one of the things I've listed down is metrics. And when I say metrics, I mean know what the objective of your CPQ project is before you start your project, and then having metrics that you can measure against as you're in that project lifecycle. Because whether we like it or not, requirements change during project phase, and you can hold that person responsible and say, actually, how does it impact the objective or the metrics that we're trying to reach here? Second one is migration. Before you begin your CPQ project, whether that be your waterfall methodology that you're using or agile, is know what tools you're using and what processes are involved. Because if you're going via that Excel inspector or you're using a tool like Gearset, Capado or Salto, those processes are going to be really different. So know upfront which tool you're using. The third one is mapping. When you implement CPQ, you're replacing a lot of the processes your users are doing on a day-to-day basis. So know which processes are going to become redundant because of your new CPQ process, and know which ones map onto the new process, because whether we like it or not, as builders, we are still part of improving that user management and user adoption of CPQ. And the final one is match. When you're implementing CPQ, there's certain skills that you're going to have in-house and internally. So when you're going out to find CPQ consultants or contractors or third parties to help support that project, every consulting company you're going to reach out to is going to have something different that they're going to bring to the table, whether that's technically or helping you support your business process management as well. So know what you're looking for when you're going out and looking for your CPQ consultant. And I've broken that down, but I've listed down top 5 challenges that companies face when they're implementing CPQ. And this is industry or vertical agnostic. And I've also listed down some of the solutions that you can implement to prevent yourself from hitting into those hurdles as well. And that's it for me.
Thanks a lot, Sham. That was great. That's actually it for everyone. That was the webinar. I hope you guys found it useful. We're over time, so let us know if you have any questions. You can reach out to us individually on LinkedIn, and we're happy to answer any questions, whether it's about Inspector, Salto, or the Salesforce CLI, or general CPQ best practices. Just reach out, and we'll send an email with the recording in the next few days. So thanks a lot, guys. Have a great day.